There's a tribe in the Amazon, real people, alive right now. This isn't a story from a dusty anthropology textbook who cannot count. Not, won't, cannot. Show a Pirahan speaker 3 sticks, then 4, and ask which pile is bigger, and something happens in their head that does not happen in yours. There's no word in their language for 3. There's no word for some versus many in the way you mean it. And here's the part that should bother you more than it probably does. They don't seem to miss it. No anxiety disorders in that population. Not low rates. Recorded absence. A people with no grammatical future tense, who don't grieve the way we grieve, worrying forward into a Tuesday that hasn't happened yet because their language simply doesn't hand them the tool to do it. Sit with that for 1 second before I say anything else. Because the easy reaction is, well, that's just a small isolated culture, exotic outlier, doesn't apply to me. But I want you to actually try something right now, not later try to think about tomorrow. Go on. Think about something you have to do tomorrow. Notice what just happened in your head. There was probably a voice. Maybe an image, a knot of dread, a to-do list, scrolling by like a stock ticker. That entire apparatus, that whole engine of forward worry, somebody had to build that. It's not free. It came from somewhere. And the tribe I just mentioned, the Piraha, deep in Brazilian Amazonia, along the Maichi River, they never got sold that particular tool, or they got a different one. Nobody's sure which. Daniel Everett went down there in the 1970s as a missionary, actually trying to translate the Bible into Piraha so he could convert them, and he ended up doing the opposite thing to his own head. He spent decades in that village, and slowly the language did something to him. He started noticing that basic sentences he was trying to teach, I think that it will rain, that kind of nested, recursive thought inside a thought structure, just don't exist in Piraha. You can't embed a clause inside a clause, the way English lets you do it infinitely, like Russian nesting dolls of thought. One clause, then you're done. Then the next one starts fresh. And when he tried to explain counting to them, using beans, laying them out in a row, asking them to lay out the same number back, adults, sharp, capable adults, could not do it past about 3. Not because they were unintelligent, because their language had never given their attention a hook to hang large quantities on. The number was there in the world. The world does not need 7 to contain 7 parrots flying overhead. But their minds, without the word, apparently don't stabilize the count the way yours does automatically, instantly, whether you want it to or not. Now here's the question. I actually want to sit inside for the next hour, because it's the one that keeps me up. Is language describing a mind, or is language building one? Because we have this folk idea, cozy, comfortable, that language is like a coat you put on a pre-existing body. The thoughts are already there, fully formed, swimming around in your skull, and words are just the clothes you dress them in to send them out into the world so other people can see them. Under that theory, the Pirahan have all the same thoughts you do, they just lack the vocabulary to express them. Cute theory, convenient theory, almost certainly wrong, or at least wrong in the way it matters. Because think about babies. Actual infants, months old, no words at all yet, not one. And what does the research on preverbal cognition actually show? Babies categorize. They expect solid objects to behave like solid objects. You can show a baby a magic trick where a ball apparently passes through a solid wall, and their eyes will widen, they'll stare longer, because something violated a physical law they already had installed. They do basic arithmetic, habituate a 6-month-old to 2 dots, then flash 3, and their attention spikes. They notice the change. They are counting, in some primitive pre-linguistic sense, without a single number word in their skull. So, there is clearly a mind before language. Cognition doesn't wait around for vocabulary to show up before it starts working. Score 1 for the language just describes theory. But then something else happens, and this is the part that actually breaks the clean story. There's a chunk of adult humans, real percentage, somewhere around 1 in 20 depending how you measure it, though estimates vary, who report having no inner monologue at all. None. Anendophasia is the term researchers use now. Ask them, what does it sound like when you think, and they look at you like you asked what color Tuesday is. They're not being cagey. They think clearly, fast, sometimes brilliantly, in something that isn't verbal. Images, spatial relationships, a wordless sense of rightness, arriving fully formed with no sentence attached to it. Which means some adult humans, right now, alive, functioning, are doing all their complicated inner reasoning in a currency that isn't words at all. So the voice in your head, the one that's probably narrating this podcast back to you right now, the one that just said, "Wait, do I have an inner monologue?" That voice is not a universal feature of the human mind, it's an option. Some people get it installed, some don't, and the ones who don't aren't thinking less, they're thinking different. So put those two facts next to each other. Babies think before words. Some adults think their whole lives with hardly any words at all. And yet the Pirahan, who have words, just different ones, structured differently, missing certain grammatical machinery, behave differently in the world because of it. No future tense anxiety, no exact numeracy. Which means language isn't the container of thought, and it isn't just the wrapping paper either. It's closer to a habit of attention, a groove the mind runs in, because the groove is there, worn into the culture, worn into the grammar. And once you're born into a groove, you don't notice it as a groove, you just call it how things are. Here's the version of this that isn't Amazon anecdote, isn't fringe. This one's been replicated, published, argued over in linguistics departments for years. There's an Aboriginal Australian community, Gugu Yimithir speakers, up in far north Queensland, and their language has almost no words for left and right relative to your own body. Instead, everything is coded in absolute cardinal direction. North, south, east, west, baked directly into ordinary grammar. Not for giving directions on a hike for everything. Move your cup a little to the north. There's an ant on your south leg. I want you to feel how strange that sentence is. An ant. On your south leg. Not your left leg. That would require you to know which way you're facing to even locate the ant, and apparently that's exactly the point. Speakers of this language, tested again and again, maintain a constant, unconscious, always-on sense of which way is north, even in a windowless room, even after being spun around, even in total darkness. Researchers call it dead reckoning, and it's not a party trick they perform. It's just how their attention is built, because their grammar demanded it be built that way from the moment they learned to talk. You, on the other hand, and I mean you, right now, listening to this, if I asked you to point north without checking your phone, there's a real chance you'd get it wrong. Not because you're less intelligent, because your language never forced your attention to track it. English gave you left and right instead, body relative. And so your whole spatial cognition organized itself around your own torso as the center of the universe, instead of around the fixed compass of the earth. This is the modern, careful version of an idea called linguistic relativity, Sapir-Whorf. If you've heard the term thrown around, usually wrong, usually as language imprisons thought. Language is a jail cell. You literally cannot think thoughts your language has no words for. That crude version got tested and mostly didn't hold up. You can think about things you have no word for, you do it all the time. That itchy feeling of, there's a concept here and I don't have the word, that's real, that happens. So the cage version is basically dead, but what survived, what actually held up under decades of hostile testing, is subtler and in some ways stranger. Language doesn't cage thought, it biases attention. It decides, by default, without asking your permission, what your mind bothers to track automatically versus what it has to consciously, effortfully notice. Cardinal direction, for a Gugu Yimithir speaker, isn't effort, it's default. For you, it would take work. So the question underneath the question is, what is your language quietly deciding not to make you track? What's running by default in your head right now that you assume is just how minds work, when really it's just how English works? I want to take you somewhere else for a second, because there's an older example of this, one you've probably heard the outline of, but maybe not the actual detail, and the detail is what makes it land. Homer. The Iliad, the Odyssey, composed, or at least first crystallized, somewhere around the 8th century BCE. And there's a strange thing scholars noticed a long time ago, going back to a 19th century British politician named Gladstone, of all people, who sat down and actually counted every color reference in Homer. And blue isn't there. Not once. The sea, famously, repeatedly, is wine dark, not blue. Sheep are described with a color word that we'd translate as violet. Honey is described as green. And it's not just Homer. You can trace this pattern through a huge swath of ancient texts, ancient Greek, and it turns out the vocabulary was organized primarily around brightness and intensity, light versus dark, vivid versus dull, not around what we'd call hue, the actual position on a color wheel. Blue, this specific color that feels to you like an obvious, irreducible fact of the visible world, arrives shockingly late as a named category across most ancient languages. And in some living languages today, it still hasn't fully split off from green. Now, and this is the part people mess up, so let me be careful. This does not mean ancient Greeks were colorblind. Their eyes worked exactly like yours. The photons hitting their retinas were identical. Nobody is claiming the sea used to actually look wine-colored, and then, some centuries later, the sky reached down and repainted it blue. That's not what's happening. Here's what might be happening instead, and there's real modern research backing this. Without a distinct word to catch it, a color can pass through your visual field and not get flagged, not get remembered, not get compared, not get discussed, even though it was, technically, seen. There's contemporary work with the Himba people in Namibia who have color categories that split the spectrum differently than English does, and they will spot a shade difference within their own named category almost instantly. A difference you or I would stare at for 10 seconds and miss completely while being slower on a boundary that, to your eye, looks obvious. Because English trained your eye to snap to that particular boundary, and their language never did. Same photons, same eyes, different net, thrown over the same ocean of light. So try this. Actually try it. Don't just let the sentence go by next time you're outside. Pick a color you'd normally just call blue and try to notice. Is it closer to slate, or teal, or cobalt, or something that doesn't have a clean English name at all? Watch your own mind hunt for the word. That hunting, that little half-second lag while your brain searches its lexicon for a bucket to drop the color into, that's the seam. That's the place where you can actually feel language doing its quiet, invisible sorting work on raw experience, in real time, right now, in your own head. Okay, I want to go deeper into the Piraha material for a minute, because there's a piece of it I haven't told you yet, and it's the piece that actually unsettled Everett the most, more than the numbers, more than the recursion thing. Their language also resists what he called immediacy of experience, meaning they are extremely reluctant to talk about, and by extension to seem to even think much about, things outside direct personal experience or the direct experience of someone they know firsthand. No elaborate creation myths passed down through generations the way you'd expect from most oral cultures. No abstract distant past, no distant future, none of the mythological deep time scaffolding that shows up in nearly every other human culture we've ever studied. Whenever it tried to tell them about Jesus, the whole reason he originally went down there, they had one question that stopped him cold. Have you seen him? Has anyone you know personally seen him? And when the honest answer was no, the story simply didn't stick. Not because they were hostile to it. Because their entire cognitive and linguistic architecture is built to treat second-hand, non-witnessed information as essentially lower-grade data. Interesting, maybe, not load-bearing. Now here's where I want to make you personally uncomfortable for a second, because that's the job right now. How much of what's inside your head right now, this moment, forming your opinions, your fears, your sense of what's true about the world, is stuff you've directly witnessed with your own eyes, versus stuff that arrived to you as language, second-hand, third-hand, filtered through someone else's sentences, someone else's framing, someone else's choice of adjective. Almost all of it, nearly the entire architecture of what you believe to be true about history, about other countries, about people you've never met, about the shape of the distant past and the trajectory of the future, none of that is witnessed. All of it is linguistic, You are, in a very real sense, living inside a building made almost entirely of other people's sentences, and you've been in there so long you've forgotten it's a building and started calling it reality. The Piraham built a smaller house, fewer rooms, but every room they've actually stood in. And I don't say that to romanticize them, because there's always a trade. No numbers means no ability to track exact quantities of trade goods, which puts them at a real material disadvantage when outsiders come through with rubber and machetes and count things exactly, while the Pirahan can only estimate. There's no free lunch here. Different grammar, different mind, different vulnerabilities, different immunities. But it is proof. Actual field-tested, decades-long, peer-reviewed, argued about proof that the shape of the tool changes the shape of the hand that holds it. That a mind can be built, quite literally built, differently by the grammar it's handed as a child, before it ever gets a vote in the matter. All right, before I go further out, I want to actually give you something solid to stand on, because I've been circling a lot of open questions, and if I keep doing that for an hour straight, it starts to feel less like an idea and more like a magic trick where the rabbit never comes out of the hat. So here's a real, earned little landing point, and then I promise I'll immediately complicate it again, because that's the deal. The landing point is this. Language is not a translator sitting between your mind and the world, faithfully carrying information back and forth. It's closer to a search algorithm running continuously in the background of your attention, deciding before you're even conscious of the decision what gets flagged as relevant, what gets grouped with what gets remembered as one thing versus two things, what counts as urgent versus background noise. The Gugu Yimithir speaker's compass sense, the Pirahan's flat relationship to number and to unwitnessed time, the ancient Greeks' brightness sorted rather than hue sorted rainbow. None of these are bugs. None of these are people missing something you have. They're evidence that the sorting algorithm can be written differently, and once it's written a certain way in childhood, it runs invisibly, permanently, underneath everything, and you will swear up and down that it's just how the world is, because you have never once run the other algorithm to compare. That's the earned insight. Sit in it for a second. Now here's the harder question it immediately opens up, and I'm not going to pretend I have a clean answer. If the sorting algorithm is doing that much work, deciding what you notice before you notice it, then how much of what you'd call your personality, your particular flavor of anxiety, your particular way of loving someone, your particular relationship to regret, how much of that is actually you? And how much of it is just which language happened to install itself in your skull between the ages of about 1 and 5, while you had absolutely no say in the matter? And hey, before I keep pulling that thread, if this kind of thing is doing something for you, the way an ordinary fact about a river tribe in the Amazon can quietly rearrange how you experience your own thinking 20 minutes later, that's the whole reason this show exists. Hit subscribe if you haven't. It genuinely does help a small channel like this keep going. And if there's a language or an idea from your own life that's been nagging at you the way the Pirahan story is probably nagging at you right now, drop it in the comments. I read them. Sometimes an entire future episode starts in that comment section. Okay, back into it. Because here's a genuine complication to everything I've said so far, and I think it's important to actually let it in rather than smooth it over. If language were simply cleanly determining thoughtful, Worfian cage, no exceptions, then bilingual people should basically be running two separate personalities, two separate perceptual worlds, switching costumes every time they switch tongues. And there is something to that. There's real research showing bilinguals report feeling like a slightly different person in each language, make different moral judgments on the exact same hypothetical dilemma, depending which language it's posed in, even show measurably different emotional reactions to swear words, depending on whether it's their first language or a language learned later in life. Because the first language got wired in alongside the actual emotional circuitry of childhood, and the second one got bolted on later, more cognitively, less viscerally. So there is a real shift, but it's not total. A bilingual person doesn't become a stranger to themselves crossing from one language to the other. There's a them that persists underneath, that watches the shift happen, that can even comment on the shift. I feel more direct in German, more polite in Japanese, and that noticing requires a vantage point that isn't purely inside either language. Something is standing at the seam, watching both rooms, that isn't fully identical to either room. So maybe the honest position, the position I actually want to leave you with, not because it's comfortable but because I think it's true, is that language is neither the cage nor the key. It's not a prison, and it's not a lockpick for prisons that don't exist. It's closer to the specific hand you were dealt in a game, where the actual game, whatever raw pre-linguistic cognition really is, the stuff babies have, the stuff the endophasic adults are apparently doing without a verbal narrator, that game is still being played underneath by something older than grammar. That language then reaches down into and reorganizes biases, sharpens in certain directions and dulls in others, without ever fully replacing it, which raises an actual uncomfortable question, and I want to just leave it hanging here rather than answer it, because I don't think it has a clean answer. If there's a you underneath all your languages, watching them, comparing them, is that underneath you made of anything at all? Or is it just the echo of every language you've ever half learned, cancelling each other out, leaving a residue that only feels like a stable self because it's too quiet to interrogate? I want to bring in something stranger now, something that sits right at the edge of language, half inside it and half outside it, and might tell us more about what language actually is by showing us what happens when the referential part, the meaning-carrying part, gets stripped clean off and only the shape is left. Glossolalia, speaking in tongues. You've probably seen footage, a Pentecostal service, someone in an altered emotional state, a flood of syllables pouring out, fast, patterned, rhythmic, with all the surface features of an actual language consonant-vowel structure, intonation, stress patterns that rise and fall like real speech, and zero referential content. Linguists have recorded this extensively, run it through the same phonetic analysis they'd run on an unfamiliar real language, and it consistently comes back the same way, structured like language, empty of language's actual job, which is to point at something outside itself. Here's what I think is genuinely wild about that, and I don't think it gets said often enough. It means the human nervous system has a language generator that can be switched on independently of the meaning generator. Those are not the same circuit. You can run the sound shape of language, the rhythm, the syntax-like patterning, the felt sense of communication happening with the referential engine, completely disconnected, idling in neutral, producing pure form. It's like discovering your car engine can rev, can make every noise an engine makes, completely unplugged from the transmission. The performance of meaning-making, running with no meaning inside it. And I want you to notice something about your own inner life for a second, because I don't think glossolalia is as foreign to you as the footage makes it look. Have you ever been extremely tired or extremely emotional and felt words rising in your throat before you had any idea what you were actually about to say? That lag, that half second where the mouth is already moving and the content hasn't fully arrived yet, that's the same machinery, just usually running with the meaning circuit plugged back in a fraction of a second later, so you never notice the gap. Glossolalia is what happens when that gap just doesn't get filled. The form shows up, the referent never does. Which brings me to territory that used to be called, by an earlier generation of people who thought seriously about this stuff, the syntax of the ineffable. And I want to be careful here, because this next part is genuinely strange, and I'm not going to pretend it's been nailed down by neuroscience, because it hasn't, but it's too directly relevant to leave out. There's a specific, repeatedly reported experience among people who've taken DMT, a naturally occurring compound, also produced in trace amounts by your own brain. Incidentally, though what it's doing there in tiny quantities is still genuinely unresolved science of encountering what feels, unmistakably, like language. Not visions that feel like pictures, visions that feel like being spoken to, or shown information that has grammar, that has syntax, that clearly means something specific and structured, and yet, on the way back out, on the way back into English, it will not fit. People report the specific, maddening sensation of having understood something completely, totally, unambiguously, in the moment, and then reaching for the door back into ordinary language and finding the doorway is the wrong shape for what they're carrying. Not that they forgot it, that it never had an English-shaped version to begin with. I'm not going to tell you what that is. Nobody actually knows what that is. But I want you to notice the shape of the problem, because it rhymes, exactly, with everything else we've talked about tonight. It's the unendophasic adult trying to describe wordless thought to someone who's never had a thought without words. It's Everett trying to translate the concept of a resurrected God to people whose grammar refuses unwitnessed testimony. It's you, 5 minutes ago, trying to find the actual name of a color that isn't quite blue and isn't quite teal. Every one of these is the same fundamental event. Something real, something structured, something that clearly has shape and meaning, arriving at the border of English, and English not having a visa for it. Which makes me wonder, and here's a question worth just letting sit unanswered, the way it deserves, to what if ineffable doesn't mean vague? What if some experiences are, in fact, extremely precise, extremely well-formed, extremely language-like, and the failure isn't in the experience? The failure is a genuine translation failure. The same ordinary kind of failure that happens when you try to move a joke from French into English and it just dies. Not because the joke was fuzzy, but because the target language has no slot shaped like the source. There's a way to think about this that goes back to a Swiss linguist named Ferdinand de Saussure, early 1900s, who pointed out something so simple it's almost embarrassing. And yet almost nobody actually lives like they believe it. The word tree has no natural connection to an actual tree. None. It's arbitrary. A different community could have picked any sound at all and did. French picked arbre, German picked baum, and it would work exactly as well, because the word isn't secretly, mystically tree-shaped. It's a sign, a pointer, agreed upon by a whole community, floating just slightly above the actual bark and leaves object it refers to. Most of the time, this gap between sign and thing is so thin you never feel it. You hear tree. A tree concept just appears in your head. No seam, no friction. Like the word and the thing are welded together. But every so often the gap opens up and you can actually feel it, feel the seam, and it's disorienting in a small, specific way. Say any ordinary word, out loud, 20 times in a row. Spoon, 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 and somewhere around repetition 12 or 13, something happens. The word stops pointing at spoons. It becomes just a noise your mouth is making, a shape of sound, disconnected from the object. Linguists call it semantic satiation, and it's a real, replicable, slightly unsettling little experiment you can run on your own mind in the next 10 seconds if you want to. Try it after this sentence. Pick a word, say it out loud, fast, over and over, and watch the meaning fall off the sound like paint peeling off a wall. That's the arbitrary sign showing its seams. That's the moment the word stops being invisible and becomes, suddenly, just an object itself, sound, shape, nothing behind it, the exact same collapse. In miniature, that happens in glossolalia, that happens on DMT, trying to cross back into English, that happens whenever the referential glue that normally holds sign to thing simply lets go for a second, and you're left holding a naked little packet of sound with the meaning drained out of it. Now, here's an interruption to the interruption, because I want you to actually feel the flip side of this too, not just the breakdown. I want you to feel a moment where the sign and the thing get so close they nearly fuse, because that's just as strange as satiation, in the opposite direction. Think about the last time you heard your own name, unexpectedly, across a crowded room. Not called directly at you, just spoken, somewhere in the noise, by someone talking to someone else, about someone else entirely, and it happened to also be your name. What happened in your body? Your head turned before you decided to turn it. There is almost no gap there at all between sign and self. Your name isn't a description of you the way tall or curious would be a description of you. It's practically fused to your identity at the neural level, wired in since infancy, and it can yank your whole attention across a noisy room faster than almost any other stimulus your ears can pick up. So you're carrying, right now, both extremes inside the same skull. Some words so loosely attached to their meaning that saying them 20 times makes the meaning fall off entirely. And other words, your own name, chief among them, fuse so tightly to identity that hearing them involuntarily redirects your whole nervous system. The entire spectrum of human language lives somewhere between those two poles, nearly arbitrary noise on one end, nearly fused to self on the other. And most of the words you use all day sit somewhere in the vast, unglamorous middle, doing their quiet work, the seem invisible, until something, repetition, altered states, an unexpected shout across a room makes you feel the seam again. I want to go somewhere that feels like a hard left turn but isn't, because it's actually about the exact same seam, just seen from a different angle, the moment writing entered human life and rewired what a mind even was. There's a scholar, Walter Jung, who wrote about this carefully, the difference between what he called primary orality, cultures with no writing at all, and what happens once writing shows up and starts doing its slow, patient work on the collective nervous system. And here's the concrete thing that always gets me. Those famous Homeric epithets, swift-footed Achilles, wine-dark sea, rosy-fingered dawn, phrases that repeat, almost word for word, dozens of times across the Iliad and the Odyssey. Those aren't lazy poetry, they're not filler, they're memory technology. In a culture with no writing, an oral poet performing an epic that takes literal days to recite has to hold the entire structure in a living, working memory with nothing external to check against, no page to glance back at, and repeated formulaic phrases function like handholds on a cliff face, load-bearing structural units that let the mind grip the story and keep climbing without falling. Wine-dark sea isn't there because the poet lacked imagination. It's there because it's a pre-built block that snaps into the meter exactly, freeing the reciting mind to focus on what comes next. The way a jazz musician leans on a chord progression they know cold, so they can improvise freely on top of it. And then writing shows up, and something in the texture of thought itself starts to shift. Once you can write a thing down, you no longer need to carry it, rhythmically, communally, in your body, in call and response, in repetition worn smooth like a river stone. You can set it outside yourself, on a surface, and walk away, and come back to it unchanged. That sounds like a small, purely practical convenience. Jung's argument, and it's a serious one, is that it's not small at all, that it restructures the actual shape of thought, that it opens up the possibility of the kind of long, linear, single-threaded, internally consistent argument that this very monologue is attempting to be right now, a mode of thinking that a purely oral mind, before writing existed, would have had much less access to, because a purely oral mind's thoughts have to be shaped for memory, for the community, for the rhythm of a living voice, not for the silent, solitary, page-bound argument. Which means the interior monologue we talked about earlier, the verbal narrator running in some but not all of your heads, might not be some ancient, timeless feature of the human animal at all. It might be, at least in its heavily linear, argumentative, silent reading form, a comparatively recent technology, a side effect of writing itself, something that had to be built. Historically, the way the Pirahan's flat relationship to unwitnessed time had to be built, the way the Gugu Yimithir compass sense had to be built, not born in, but grown in, by the specific tools a specific culture happened to hand a mind before it was old enough to know it had a choice. Small resolution, and I want to actually let this one land fully, because I think it's the real hinge of the whole hour. Every single thread we've pulled tonight, the Pirahan's flat time, the Greek brightness sorted rainbow, the Gugu Yimithir compass, glossolalia, the DMT syntax that won't cross into English, semantic satiation, Homer's memory load epithets, every one of these is the same event, wearing a different costume. It's the moment where the sign and the signified come apart just far enough for you to feel that they were ever two separate things at all. Ordinarily, invisibly, your whole life, word, and world are welded shut, seamless, and you live entirely inside the welded product, calling it reality, never suspecting the weld. And then, rarely, briefly, through a strange tribe, a strange substance, a strange repetition, a strange translation failure, the world shows, just for a second, and you get to see that there were always two things there, held together by nothing but agreement, habit, and time. That's real, that's earned, I believe that. Here's what it immediately breaks open, though, and I don't have the other side of this one. If the weld is showable, if it can come loose under the right pressure, then what, actually, is on the other side of it? Not, what is the true, wordless nature of reality? That's too big, too new age. I want something sharper than that. I mean, when the Pirahan speaker looks at 4 parrots and doesn't stabilize them into 4, what is he actually experiencing instead? Not less, different. What is the raw, unsorted material underneath the sorting? Because it's clearly not nothing. The parrots are still being seen, tracked, responded to. It's just not being carved the way your mind automatically, invisibly carves it. And I don't think any of us, not me, not the neuroscientists, not the linguists who've spent 40 years in that village, actually knows what that raw, uncarved perceptual material is like from the inside. We only know it exists because we can find its edges, the places where our version of carving stops working and theirs starts. Let me bring in one more piece of concrete evidence before this widens out, because I don't want this hour to become pure mood. I want you to have something you could actually go look up tomorrow and verify for yourself. Untranslatable words. Everyone's heard a couple thrown around at dinner parties, Hygge, Schadenfreude, usually a little flattened, a little souvenir shop version of the real thing. But sit with a real one for a second. Saudade. Portuguese not simply missing someone. English speakers usually reach for that translation and it's wrong, or at least badly incomplete. It's closer to a longing for something you love that is gone, or that maybe never fully existed the way you remember it, held with a kind of aching tenderness rather than plain sadness, love and loss fused into one feeling rather than sequential. Or mono no aware, Japanese, the specific, bittersweet awareness of the impermanence of things, felt most intensely at the exact moment something beautiful is happening, precisely because you know it's already ending, even as you're inside it. Cherry blossoms are the classic image, because they're beautiful specifically for about a week, and everyone watching them knows it. Or hiraeth, Welsh, a longing for a home, or a version of home that may not be reachable anymore, or may never have existed in the shape you're grieving. Not simple homesickness, something stranger, something with grief and myth both wound into it. Here's the actual point, and it's a testable one, not a vibe. If language merely labeled feelings that already existed, fully formed, identical across all humans, waiting patiently for a word to arrive, you'd expect every language to eventually converge on roughly the same set of labels, because the underlying feelings would already be identically shaped everywhere, in every skull. That's not what we find. We find real variation, culturally specific emotional textures that don't map cleanly onto each other, some fusing what English keeps apart, some splitting what English keeps together. Which suggests, and I think this is genuinely one of the more startling implications, sitting quietly under all the material tonight, that the actual palette of human emotional experience might be considerably wider than any single language's grid can display at once. Not that English speakers can't feel saudade. Feeling probably does happen anyway, underneath, but it happens as blur, as an untagged ache you don't have quick access to, don't rehearse, don't culturally reinforce and sharpen through repeated naming, the way a Portuguese speaker rehearses and sharpens theirs every time the word gets used around them. The word doesn't just label the feeling. Repeated use of the word trains the feeling, sharpens its edges, makes it easier to recognize the next time it shows up. The way a color word trains your eye to snap faster to a boundary that would otherwise take you 10 slow seconds to notice. Second resolution, and this one's smaller, but I think it's the sharpest thing I'll say all night, so let me just say it plainly. If words can train feelings, sharpen a blur into a recognizable, nameable shape through nothing but repetition and cultural reinforcement, then learning a genuinely new word, a real untranslatable one, from a language not your own, isn't decoration. It isn't trivia. It's closer to installing a new sense organ, a narrow one, aimed at a specific, previously blurry patch of your own emotional life that you've been feeling unnamed your entire life, without ever being able to hold it still long enough to look at directly. Try this tomorrow. Actually try it. Don't just let the sentence pass the next time you feel some complicated, hard-to-place emotional weather moving through you. Something that doesn't quite match sad or happy or anxious. Pause and ask whether it might already have a name somewhere on earth, in some language you don't speak. Not to force a label onto it dishonestly, just to notice that the vagueness you're feeling might not be a property of the feeling itself. It might be a property of the sorting algorithm you happen to be issued, and there might be other algorithms spoken by other humans right now, on the same planet, under the same sky, that would have caught it cleanly, on the first pass, without any struggle at all. So where does this actually leave us? Not as an answer. I keep telling you I don't have one, and I mean it, but as a shape, a live shape, something you can keep carrying after this ends. Go back to the very beginning. 4 parrots, a Pirahan speaker, no words stabilizing them into 4. A baby, months old, no words at all, already flinching at a magic trick that violates physics it hasn't been taught, only witnessed. An adult with no inner monologue, thinking clearly, fluently, in something that isn't language at all. Someone on DMT, encountering something with grammar, with unmistakable syntax, that will not survive translation back into English, no matter how hard they try on the way down. A word said 20 times until the meaning bleeds out of it, and it becomes a naked sound. Every single one of these is a mind touching something that language did not create, could not fully capture. And yet, and here's the genuinely strange part, the part I don't think gets said enough, that same untamed, uncarved, wordless material is also, somehow, exactly what language keeps reaching toward, keeps trying to net, keeps almost catching. Language isn't separate from that raw material, standing outside it, describing it from a safe distance. It's grown directly out of it, an organ the species built. The way an eye is an organ, a species built out of raw photons it couldn't otherwise touch. And like an eye, it doesn't show you everything that's there. It shows you a slice, the slice it evolved to catch, and calls that slice the visible world. And mostly, you forget there was ever more spectrum than what the eye happened to be built for. So the compass sense of a Gugu Yimithir speaker, the flat unworried time of a Pirahan speaker, the wordless fluent thought of someone with no inner monologue, the untranslatable ache of saudade, the syntax that shows up on DMT and refuses the trip home. None of these are exotic edge cases you can safely file away as not relevant to me. They're all instruments. Different instruments, each one built to catch a slightly different slice of the same underlying, uncarved, enormous thing that no single language, including yours, including English, including the one running silently behind your eyes as you listen to this sentence right now, has ever caught completely. And here's the very last thing I want to leave sitting on the table, unresolved, because I think it deserves to stay unresolved, rather than get wrapped into something tidy and forgettable. If every language is a different net thrown over the same ocean, catching different fish, missing different fish, training its speakers to feel expertly at home with exactly the catch their net happens to be good at, then what would it even mean to think a thought that no net has ever caught? Not a thought in a language you haven't learned yet. An actual thought that no human language, living or dead, spoken by any of the roughly 7,000 tongues our species has ever produced, has a net shaped correctly to catch. Does that thought exist somewhere, right now, uncaught, swimming past every one of us, felt by nobody because nobody has the net for it? Or does a thought only start existing, only become a real thing rather than raw, unshaped potential, the moment some language somewhere finally throws a net wide enough and the right shape to catch it? I don't know. I don't think anyone actually knows. I think that question is still out there, uncaught, doing whatever an uncaught thought does, while it waits for a language, maybe one that hasn't been invented yet, maybe one being spoken right now by 300 people on a riverbank you'll never visit, to finally throw a net, the right shape to bring it in.